Welcome to Three and Outs Collective. It is me, Brendan Sweany, along with my brothers Lucas and Quinlan Sweany. We are back with you here on this Wednesday talking about the NFL. Just some additions, acquisitions made by the Northern Division teams in both the NFC and AFC here today. So we'll start in the NFC, guys. And let's begin at the bottom of the NFC North, team that's currently being showcased in Hard Knocks, the Detroit Lions. Quinlan, they had a pretty decent draft. They traded up to get Jamison Williams. They also did a very good job shoring up their pass rush with Aiden Hutchinson in the number 2 spot. But were there any additional moves, do you think, Quinlan, that they made that will help them this season?
I'm not sure if they made a bunch of moves that are going to help them this year. I think the draft was pretty good for them. I think Aiden Hutchinson's going to help with pass rush. Their defense is what needs a lot of the help. I feel like their offense, as it's getting healthy, is going to be able to be much improved. I think one of the guys that they just showcased in episode 2 of Hard Knocks, Malcolm Rodriguez, is going to be pretty big addition if he ends up panning out at linebacker. I think he's got a lot of energy, does things the right way on the football field. I think the Lions' run defense is their biggest issue. If they can shore up their run defense in general, I think they could have a lot of success.
Malcolm Rodriguez is a guy that he was a 6th-round pick in the draft this year, so a guy that maybe they didn't expect a ton of coming out, but definitely Hard Knocks, he's been making his presence felt. Lucas, the Lions' offense, I think Quinlan has a good point. I think their offense does have the pieces that it needs to be an effective one. I mean, they've got a much better offensive line after last year, adding Penei Sewell in the draft, and they've already had a couple of years prior to that where they added onto that offensive line. Do you think that offense is going to be good enough this year, and did they not do enough to add to it?
I think so. I don't even think they really had to add much. I know the offense wasn't good last year, but it wasn't fully healthy very much last season. At least when Amon-Ra St. Brown came on last year, that was kind of when Hawkinson and Swift were both out and missing games, so they just didn't really have all of those weapons together much of the season last year. So I think that adding Jameson Williams and a big, fast receiver like DJ Chark, adding those types of weapons is going to be really helpful for Jared Goff, because we've seen him be very successful before in an offense that has good weapons and a system that works, So I think that they have the weapons now. I think all they need is a system that works, and I think that we could see Goff have some success there, and I think this Lions team is going to be very sneaky.
Yeah, maybe the Lions front office knew something that we didn't when they made the trade, to send Stafford to the Rams, that really they just needed to build around Goff and have the correct type of offense for him. But I think this year may be, kind of that litmus test for him, Jared Goff, just to see where he's at, how the Lions end up doing at the end of this year, and it may end up, if it doesn't go well, it may be new quarterback territory next offseason. But let's move on to the Chicago Bears, who had a dismal offseason, in my opinion. They definitely didn't seem to do a whole lot in terms of surrounding Fields with a lot of weapons. Lucas, is this just kind of a bad sign for Fields?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty bad sign. I mean, they really didn't do anything for him with weapons-wise. I mean, all you got is Darnell Mooney there, Cole Kmet. I mean, they added some guys, Byron Pringle, Equinemius St. Brown, N'Keal Harry, they went out and traded for him. So these guys are all kind of like big, like physical receivers that just haven't succeeded in the NFL. So, I mean, I guess they're giving them shots, but I mean, Fields is gonna kind of need guys that can separate. I mean, Fields in college was a good deep ball thrower, but they had a lot of good weapons, good receivers at Ohio State. So, I mean, I guess maybe get big guys that can go up and catch the ball downfield, and maybe they're going to try to do that a lot. I don't know. We'll see. But their offensive line's terrible, so Fields is going to be running for his life a lot. I don't know. The Bears, they look like they're in for a struggle of the season.
When I look at the Bears, none of those receivers they grabbed this offseason are really proven. I mean, they've been in the league a few years, but not one of them I think has ever had a 1,000-yard season, and it just doesn't seem that they did what was necessary to bring in guys that have proven talent to try to help Fields along. And when you're early in your career like Fields, having to deal with the Matt Nagy thing last year in his first year, and now a new coach and no weapons. It doesn't look great for him. Quinlan, the Bears' defense had been decent previously. There had been a couple of years back, Khalil Mack was a part of the defense when they were really strong. Roquan Smith being a guy in the middle that was important. But there's some problems with Roquan Smith right now, but that's neither here nor there right now. But acquisitions-wise, did they add anything that you think could help their defense maybe be the part of the team that kind of holds them above water?
I'm not loving anything they've done on defense. I think they just really shot themselves in the foot in general. Khalil Mack leaving, and then probably scaring Roquan Smith out the door with their offer, with low ball offers. I don't love anything the Bears are doing right now. They're in the type of situation and organization where you're supposed to be good. You're supposed to put a good roster around your cheap rookie contract quarterback, and they haven't done it. So I don't see the Bears really improving that much over Fields' career, because by the time they get kind of good, or like maybe being able to be good, he's going to command a large contract, and that's going to hurt their ability to ever build around him.
At this point, it kind of seems to me like the Bears have kind of already signaled that we're not going to be able to build around our quarterback here. So my guess is that they may end up down the road having to possibly even trade him if he's not showing anything. And then, with having no weapons, maybe somebody else takes a flyer on him in the future, Fields, if he's not, producing to the level where the Bears maybe think he could be. But the Bears haven't helped him, so there's really no excuse on that side of things. Let's move on. The Minnesota Vikings are a team that has been pretty average lately. Their offense always puts up points, it seems, but their defense hasn't been so great, especially last year. They definitely took a step back. Lucas, do you think they added enough on defense? Did they add anything in your mind defensively that is going to help them this year maybe get over the hump and be above 500 and maybe a playoff team?
They added Zadarius Smith, I know, which is a pretty big pickup to help off the edge with guys like Danielle Hunter. So they have some solid veteran pieces there that are proven and have done good things, in the NFL. So now it's about Danielle Hunter being healthy. And they brought Patrick Peterson back, another veteran. It's kind of an older defense, but they did get some young guys. They drafted Lewis Seen, I believe, maybe very end of the first round. I think they maybe traded back into the first round to get him. That's a good piece. They drafted Andrew Booth Jr. out of Clemson, corner, in maybe the early second round. So those are two young pieces in the secondary that can help out a lot. I think this Vikings team could be kind of a sleeper in the NFC, honestly, if those rookies pan out.
Yeah, I think when I look at the Vikings, that is the thing for me that I question is their defense. And especially for me, it's the middle of their defense, especially at linebacker. They no longer have Anthony Barr. And I think in general, that team has previously been a team that was pretty decent on defense for quite a while in these, late 2010s. And they've kind of shifted and become the offense first team And so Quinlan, their offense, they didn't really do a whole lot. They didn't really acquire anybody necessarily for that offense that's going to be a huge piece. But do you think their offense can stay at the same level this year?
I think their offense will probably improve. I think O'Connell coming over from the Rams is going to open things up significantly. I think Thielen being healthy, he's going to still have a good season. You might think that him getting old, he's going to fall off a little bit, but I think he's going to be rejuvenated this year after an off year last year with injuries. I think just the Vikings defense in general last year, I don't think they can be as bad as they were last year. They had the worst 4-minute defense in the NFL since 2006, ranked 686 out of 686 teams since 2000, giving up a touchdown on 32.4% of opponent drives in the final 4 minutes before halftime or the end of the game, which NFL average was 12%. The first worst team last year was 20.6%. They were 32.4%. It's a really awful late half and late end of the game defense, which I think they'll improve for sure.
Maybe that's just a them choking thing, because they did that a lot. They definitely did choke a lot in these games that they had last year. They were a team that was right around 500 last year, and they could have probably won 12 games if some things had gone right for them in those games. So I think you're right, Lucas, to think that they could be competitive and kind of a sleeper. We shall see with Minnesota. O'Connell could be, technically he could be an acquisition as well, because that is their old head coach Zimmer was a defensive-minded guy. So maybe it's maybe a little bit different this year. Their offense maybe doesn't stall sometimes. The Green Bay Packers, the NFC North champions last year, a team that has Aaron Rodgers under center and lost their biggest target in the receiving game, Devontae Adams. They did bring in a couple receivers in the draft, Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs, and I think they brought in Sammy Watkins as well as a veteran to try to kind of fill that hole. Obviously, when you lose a Hall of Fame type player like Devontae Adams, 3 guys, 2 rookies, and a veteran who plays one good week a year, not necessarily always going to be able to replace somebody like that. But Quinlan, the Packer offense, I think it's going to be a little bit different this year, a lot more running game than passing game.
I think the run game will definitely increase a little bit, but I think just running back involvement is going to increase a lot. I think Aaron Jones will get 20 more targets this year at least. A.J. Dillon, a few more as well. I think, honestly, Rodgers, that's the guy he trusts the most in the offense, Aaron Jones, catching passes. And when he had opportunities, I believe it was either 2 or 3 years ago, where he just had a monster year, ton of touchdowns. Involvement in the passing game was so high before they had Dillon. I think you could see a season like that from Aaron Jones. And I think Alan Lazard is going to have a great year this year. I think the rookies, they might progress as the season moves along, as Rodgers gets more comfortable with them. But Lazard, from the get-go, I think will have a lot more targets and a lot better output.
Lazard, a guy that was undrafted free agent signing by the Packers several years ago, and Aaron Rodgers seems to be pretty high on him right now in training camp, so that's a good sign. Lucas, on the defensive side, the Packers lost a few guys as well. So they lost some players this offseason, but is their defense going to be good enough this year to kind of hold some opposition down on offense so that the Packers can kind of control the clock with the running game?
Yeah, I could see the defense being, honestly, a little better even than it was last year. They lost Zadarius Smith, I think, going from the Packers to the Vikings, so the in-division loss, that's going to hurt a little bit, facing them twice a year. Aaron Rodgers isn't going to love that, I don't think. But they brought back Devondre Campbell, which is big. He was huge last year for them. I think he was all-pro, first or second team. I'm not sure which team. I think he was all-pro, though. But that's a huge guy that they have returning. They drafted Quay Walker and Devontae Wyatt, 2 really good defenders from that Georgia championship winning team. Quay Walker probably going to fill in as a starting linebacker right off the bat. Devontae Wyatt will probably find somewhere on that defensive line to be. So they have some good players all over the defense. I mean, you got one of the best corners in the NFL with Jair Alexander. You got good safeties, Darnell Savage back there, Adrian Amos. It's a good defense with a lot of like defensive weapons. So I think honestly they could be top 10, top 5 even.
Yeah, when I look at the Packers, it's kind of like the Vikings except kind of flipped. Because previously there had been years in the 2010s when you looked at the Packers and their defense was terrible, and they really relied on Rodgers putting up numbers and tons of pass yards, and that was their formula. Now, though, I think the Packers have really improved their defense over time, and the offense is starting to get older. Obviously, Jones and Dillon not older, but their offensive line's kind of a question mark. Rodgers is nearing the end of his career. So there's definitely, it's kind of a changing of the guard in Green Bay a little bit. The defense might be asked to carry the torch a bit more this season. That's it for the NFC. Let's move over to the AFC North now. The bottom of that division last year, the spot was taken by the Cleveland Browns after a really promising year the previous season going to the playoffs. Baker Mayfield winning a game against the Steelers in the playoffs that year. And then this last year, it just wasn't a good year for him. Really, the team in general just wasn't what they wanted. And then in this offseason, obviously, they made a giant move to get Deshaun Watson. Quinlan, obviously, with the suspension situation being, kind of handed down 6 games, but then walked back, appealed by the NFL. So we'll see what ends up happening. I think it sounds to me like he's going to for sure get 6 games. It's just that we don't know when that's necessarily going to be carried out.
Yeah, I think if it stays 6 games, if he doesn't get more than 6 games, I think Jacoby Brissett can keep them within striking distance of making the playoffs. At least, I mean, it's a difficult AFC, so it's going to be tough. But I think if he can win 2, maybe 3 games in that 6-game stretch, that puts them in a spot where they can still compete for the playoffs. I like the Amari Cooper trade. You barely had to give up anything for him. Sure, it costed you a bit with the contract, but it's definitely a good weapon for Deshaun when he comes back. And I think David Njoku is going to have a great season being the first primary tight end, especially when Watson comes back. Obviously, love the run game. A little scared if Kareem Hunt has to get traded. You got to love him in a Deshaun Watson offense, the third down back ability. Obviously, the defense is strong. I don't think you have much to worry about on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, it's, when you look at the defense, it is a pretty young defense in some spots. Secondary is pretty young, for sure. They have a great pass rush, though. They got Myles Garrett there on the end, and Chase Winovich is an addition from New England, and they've got pieces there where they can be effective. But Lucas, was there a big pickup you saw from the Browns in the draft this year that you think is going to make a big impact early?
I can't think of anybody off the top of my head. They got Perrion Winfrey, I think, maybe on the
D-line
as a D tackle. But yeah, they traded most of their picks for Deshaun Watson. Most of the high picks at least. Yeah. So I think Perrion Winfrey is probably the highest pick they had in the draft.
Yeah, he was projected to go higher than he ended up going, and so
yeah, he was a good player in college. He's a good defensive lineman. I don't know if he's going to have much of a contribute. I don't know if he's going to contribute much, especially his rookie year. But yeah, I mean, this season really revolves around what the suspension is going to be for Deshaun Watson. So I mean, if it ends up being a year, I don't think they're going to compete this year. Especially like Quinlan said, the AFC is really good. So yeah, they might kind of just have to retool for next year, depending on the suspension. That is.
Yeah, I think for Watson, it's a just bad situation all around. But another thing too, if he has to be replaced by Brissett to start the season. That offensive line is in some shambles right now. They've lost like 2 centers in training camp already for like the season. They're not looking good on that note. And Brissett, not the most mobile of QBs. So who knows with the Browns? Maybe they consider. I mean, I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo is much more mobile. He's a little bit more mobile than Brissett, but maybe they consider making a trade or something for Garoppolo at this point. But the Browns in a kind of weird spot right now for sure. Let's move on. The Baltimore Ravens had a injury-riddled 2021 season where they were just devastated. Their running game, I mean, there were weeks in that season last year where they would bring a guy off the street, Devontae Freeman, for a week and just be like, hey, you're the guy, just carry the ball 20 times. You know, that's how it went last year for the Ravens injury-wise. So, obviously, this is a chance for them to have a big bounce-back year. They've got J.K. Dobbins finally getting ready to go here. Hopefully, he'll be ready early in the season. We don't know necessarily when he'll be ready to go, but Quinlan, the Ravens offense, their receiving core, they lost Marquise Brown, right? But they I think they have what they want there now with the running game being able to be the focal point.
Yeah, I mean, there's been rumors that the Ravens are looking to pass a little more, make Lamar more of a passer than he is as a runner. Obviously, he's still going to run plenty. But I think the run game for Baltimore still might not be deep in the backfield this year. With Dobbins coming off of injury and then Gus Edwards coming off injury, and it doesn't look like he's going to even be ready at the start of the year. They're going to have to. They can't really rely a ton on the run game, but luckily Lamar will give you 8 to 12 carries a game, anyways.
Yeah.
I kind of wish they would have kept Marquise Brown, but for the most part, Lamar has only really targeted one receiver well with the tight end, one receiver and one tight end. So I guess it might not hurt that badly if Rashad Bateman takes the step that he possibly could. His target share wasn't very high last year because he was the receiver too, but I think maybe he could take a step forward this year in year 2.
Yeah, when I look at the Ravens offense last year, they kind of were to me it was like Lamar was going to the people that he could trust because they were so thin on as a team just in general that he was just kind of tunnel vision. This is the guy I'm throwing to. That's why Mark Andrews had such a massive year last year. The Ravens defense, they have been a very impressive defense for years, and they continue to retool. But Lucas, this year on defense, did they add enough to continue to improve their defense and maybe become a contender to win this division?
Yeah, I think this defense is loaded. I think the Ravens are like my sleeper team to be the most improved team in the league this year. They killed it in the draft. I mean, they got Kyle Hamilton at pick like 15, and he's arguably, I think, the most talented player in the draft. And obviously, because he's a safety, you know, he's going to fall like that. You know, you don't spend that type of draft capital on safeties like a top 10 pick. But I think he could be a huge contributor. I mean, some of what I've seen in camp, though, hasn't been great about him, but he did look pretty good in the first preseason game. He didn't look as athletic at the combine as a lot of people thought he was going to look. So I don't know. Maybe he's more of like a game speed guy. But I'm excited to see him play with them, and I think he's really going to fill in more of that like Jamal Adams role for the Ravens. I think he's going to be more like a box linebacker. And I think their secondary, they got Marcus Williams from the Saints. I think that's a huge addition. And then obviously they have Marcus Peters, who's coming back, I think, from the ACL last year. So I think it's some nice improvements.
They definitely made some additions that are going to make big improvements to the team this year in 2022. And hopefully they stay healthy this time. Let's move on. AFC North, the second place team last year in the division was the Pittsburgh Steelers somehow. It was such a weird year for the Steelers. There were games where they just looked so bad on offense. you're like, how in the world did this team end up making the playoffs? How did they find a way to be a wild card team? And so they did obviously have to change quarterbacks because Big Ben retired this offseason. So they've got a weird little competition between Trubisky, Rudolph, and Kenny Pickett that we don't really know how it's going to end up. It sounds like Trubisky probably will end up getting the start week 1. But Lucas, does that inspire any confidence in you, Mitchell Trubisky, running the Steeler offense?
I don't know. You're saying it's a weird little competition. That's pretty accurate. I don't think Mason Rudolph should be in there. And I don't really know how good Kenny Pickett is, especially like right away, So I think Trubisky is the pretty clear starter for me based off of just like what we heard with him with the Bills last year. We heard some glowing reviews from I think maybe Brian Daboll about him, just that he made like such good strides, So I'm excited to see what he can do. I mean, I don't think he was terrible with the Bears. I think that was more of the system. Matt Nagy, as we all know, not great offensive wise. We really could tell that last year with Justin Fields, So I think that he really could have been responsible for the struggles that Trubisky had,
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we've seen what Trubisky's done with a really good defense. I mean, the Bears went 13-3 in 2018 with Mitch Trubisky. So I think we could see a good season from the Steelers, especially with the weapons they have there, I mean, they have Najee Harris, just ultra-talented running back with a good, deep receiver room, too. Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, George Pickens looks amazing right now in the preseason. And even like a good tight end with Pat Freiermuth. Only problem, the O-line isn't great, but I think it's improved. They signed James Daniels from the Bears in free agency this year, which was a huge pickup, so I don't know. I'm excited to see what the offense looks like for the Steelers this year.
Yeah, and I'm excited too. And I think Trubisky, I was a little bit surprised, honestly, that Brian Daboll didn't try to just say, oh, I'm going to bring you to New York with me. We're going to run the New York offense, and Trubisky, you're going to just slide right in over Daniel Jones. But that didn't end up happening, and now the Steelers have got a chance to use him. But Quinlan, defensively, the Steelers are a great defense. Did they add anyone that you thought was a big pickup for them this offseason that'll help?
I can't think of any huge ones right now. They got Larry Ogunjobi, the defensive tackle, that I think will be a good little signing, help a little bit. I think their defense in general is just really stacked. I think if they stand any chance, it's just because their pass rush is just that menacing, causing a lot of turnovers, giving short fields for Najee. And I mean, I think Trubisky can be pretty effective this year if he takes care of the ball, and if their line holds up for him. He has a lot of good targets with Pickens and Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool. They got all kinds of receivers that do great things. I'm excited to see what the Steelers can do, see if they can revitalize Mitch Trubisky's career, even though the Steelers are probably hoping Kenny Pickett pans out as the franchise guy.
Yeah, I think Pickett is a guy the fans kind of have already got behind. I mean, you heard in the preseason game they had the other day when he was out there, they were chanting his name, Kenny, Kenny, Kenny. And so, if Tomlin does choose Trubisky, I'm sure the fans will be a little disappointed. But, if they win games, they'll forget. Let's move on to the final team here, the AFC champion Cincinnati Bengals from 2021. They are a electric offense and a defense that played above average as well, maybe a little bit more better than maybe people expected them to last year. Did they add anything defensively, Lucas, that could improve their defense even more and make them kind of maybe a favorite to be the AFC champs again?
I think they got a cornerback, Mike Hilton, from the Steelers, maybe. They didn't make any insane acquisitions on the defense. I think their big changes this year were on the O-line, but they also drafted Daxton Hill, a safety that could also play some slot corner this year. From Michigan State, I think. Really good athlete, great agility. So I think he's gonna be a pretty good defensive player right away for them. But yeah, I don't think the defense made any insane changes. They were solid last year, not great, but I mean the offense is good enough, I think, to take them to another division title, as long as the Ravens don't pop off and surprise everyone.
Yeah, and Quinlan, the Bengal offense didn't really need to do much this offseason, just their offensive line. But talk about a couple of the big additions for their O-line this year.
I really like Ted Karras and Leo Collins. I just think those are huge additions. If you can keep Burrow safe, keep him healthy, give him time to throw, there's no telling what he could do with the weapons that he has with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, even Tyler Boyd. Really good receiver 3. I like Hayden Hurst. I kind of think he's an upgrade over C.J. Uzomah. I think he adds another dimension to that tight end room. Really, in general, I think Burrow's going to have a great year. I think, in general, the thing that's going to take them to the next level is just the defense. If they can improve just a little bit, they can be really, really good this year.
I think when I look at the Bengals, it really is like last year their offense was potent and their offensive line was bad, like well below average. In this offensive line, when you look at it now, it's, above average. I mean, if you look at the names on that line, it's an above average offensive line, and that's going to do wonders for Joe Burrow. He's going to throw, I think, in my opinion, he's going to throw many fewer interceptions. He's just not going to be pressured as much as he was last year and forcing throws that he didn't need to, maybe. So, yeah, that's the show today. Wednesday NFL show in the books, guys. We'll be back on Friday with the fantasy show recapping running backs 1 through 40. And we'll just kind of split it up in groups of 5 and just kind of talk about 1 or 2 of those guys. But we'll be back with you Friday. Thanks for joining us today. And this has been 3 and Outs Collective. We will see you next time.